Melinda Cook?
Joined the meeting.
Jackie.
Hi, Melissa. How are you?
Doing all right. How are you?
Okay.
Hey, Leah.
Hi there. How are you?
Okay, how are you?
Good.
Happy New Year. It's been a while since we've
I
seen.
guess that's right. Yeah. Yeah.
Still
that's
within the first month, right?
true. It's a long year already.
Mm-hmm.
Nice.
Yeah,
Mhm.
some good changes, I think.
Yeah. No, I'm optimistic right now. Very optimistic.
Yeah. How are you guys holding up? Doing it? Oh, I'm seeing other people joining. Good. I'm curious to see. Some people are doing winter sports, and that's just not staying in this year.
Oh yeah. Yeah. I like to get out. I get out as much as I can.
Mm.
Been fun. Is your work still busy, Lou?
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Good. That's good. Yeah, I guess they were in the right place at the right time, that business. That's good.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of call to action. I'll say that
Mhm.
much.
Mm-hmm. Good. Is the training changed at all because of COVID, or
Yeah.
the topic of the training is the topic changing,
Well,
or just
yeah,
the protocols? Yeah.
well, I think like with anything, the impact of COVID has caused a lot of organizations to look at how we need to adapt. And so that definitely it's definitely something that
Mm-hmm.
educators are doing for sure. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Good. Good.
So we've got 4 of us. Has anyone talked to anyone else? Do we know if everyone else is coming, or so we're waiting for Ernie, Jeff, and Jeff.
Yeah.
Okay.
Hmm. I like that cow picture. It's a good one. Yeah. Oh, it's got windmills in the back.
Yeah.
Wow. That's cool too. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Melissa, you're still able to stay home, or you got to?
No, we're staying home still. We're having a
Yeah.
conversation on Monday to see if the governor, permits us to work from home, whether our agency would start just working from home permanently. But
Mm-hmm.
that's the way I'm voting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
even just going to Montpelier like once a week would be huge.
Yeah. Yeah. Good.
Especially in the winter.
Yeah. It's so nice not driving in the winter.
Yeah.
Didn't even have to get snow tires this year.
Oh, I think we got a quorum.
All right. Welcome, Jeff. Great. If everyone's ready to go, I assume everyone had a chance to look at the agenda. Any changes or?
I'm okay with it.
Yep. Make a
Anybody
motion.
else?
Does anyone want to
Okay.
make a motion?
Move to approve.
Second,
Second, yeah.
Jeff.
Who was the second, Melissa?
I think Jeff LaBelle actually got in a little before Leah.
Okay.
It was a race.
I mean, it really was, and you'll all have chances later, so don't worry. So Jackie, how do you vote?
Yes.
Leah, how do you vote?
Aye.
Jeff LaBelle, how do you vote?
Aye.
Brian Loeb, how do you vote?
Yes, as well.
Ernie, we were just approving the agenda. I don't know if you've had a chance to review it and are ready to vote on it.
It's fine. Sorry I'm late. Computer issues. I'm having to use a computer in my living room instead of in my office. So have to use a trustworthy computer. Anyways, yes, I have reviewed them and it's fine.
Or the agenda, sorry.
The agenda's fine.
Yeah, okay, and agenda's fine. So 6-0. Okay, the meeting objective today, as we talked about last time, we're going to discuss the approaches to a wastewater needs assessment, which should be in your packet. Rod put a lot of work into that, which is appreciated. And discuss process and policies for the Planning Commission. So that's, been on and off our agenda for a while. So we're going to work on that. Comments from the public.
Yes,
Linda Cook.
yes. Have you approved the minutes or did I not miss that?
We have not approved the minutes yet. That'll be next.
Okay. Because I've been sitting here, but I just all of a sudden came into the meeting. So thank you. All right, I'll wait.
Okay. Any other? Hearing none, we'll move on to reviewing and approving the minutes. Any comments?
Yes.
Linda, did you have a comment?
I'm going to move to approve, or we? Linda's on mute.
I'm undermuted. It's going back and forth. I keep getting muted. The only thing I'd like to do is add my name to the meeting on the minutes. I was there at the meeting, because I remember being there for the public comments from Claudette and Roger.
Okay.
And I don't think I've seen my name. Was my name on there somewhere?
I don't see it, but it looks like Rod's adding it right now.
Okay, thank you very much. I'll go back.
And, a minor typo that my last name is misspelled on page 2. I wasn't gonna say it, but I just couldn't help myself. I get that a lot. Okay, does anyone else, Jackie, did you want to make a motion?
Yeah, I'll move to approve the minutes.
Second? Leah,
Second.
thanks.
Yeah.
And, okay, Jeff LaBella, how do you vote? Thumbs up. Brian Loeb, how do you vote?
Yes.
Ernie, how do you vote?
Yes.
Leah, how do you vote?
Yes.
Jackie, how do you vote?
Yes.
And Melissa, yes. Thank you. Okay, so now we'll move on to announcements, reports, updates, and correspondence. Unless anything's changed, I don't see any correspondence, Rod, is that correct?
Correct.
Okay, so the update, Jackie has been working on those town plan action items. Jackie, do you want to give a brief update of what's going on?
Yes, I just want to say I'm really pleased again with the way folks are embracing this. I've spoken with Craig Lane from the Conservation Commission, and they're busy on their action items. The Energy Committee is well aware of theirs and keeping them front and center as they do their work. The Historical Preservation Commission is doing the same. Herb is including updates on these action items in his reports to the select board, so that's good news. And Rod's working on his items. The select board last spoke about these items. I think it was at one of their November meetings, but they continue to carry it over as one of their parking lot items, so it's not forgotten. And just want to also say that looking at the Planning Commission action items, we're also well engaged thanks to the Affordable Housing Commission, committee that's working on their items, and we're focused on ours. The things that are coming up for 2021, looking at the forest blocks with the help of the Conservation Commission, and also what's on our agenda again tonight is looking at solutions for wastewater issues. Should we be doing anything differently in that regard? And getting ready to be in a position to look at our zoning. So pleased to report that we are on track with those items. So that's good news.
Great, thanks so much, Jackie.
Mhm.
With that, we'll move on to the approaches to a wastewater needs assessment. Rod, did you want to take the lead on that with all the work that you did?
Sure, thank you. Yeah, I just wanted to make some preliminary remarks. So there are 2 studies or excerpts from 2 studies from the same company in your packets. And one of these was funded through a municipal planning grant, and I believe some additional town funds over and above the regular contribution. And the other study was funded through the DEC, the Department of Environmental Conservation funding source, that has as a condition that if you take that grant money and then proceed to do something like build a wastewater system, or use the findings of the study to then make some kind of capital commitment, the study is free. If you do the study and decide that it demonstrates that you don't need to do anything, or the community cannot agree on doing something, then you have to pay it back. So the scope of the studies are actually fairly similar. The price is probably fairly similar, which they both are in the 12 to 15-year-old mark now. in terms of the dates of the studies. The communities are very similar in some regards and then different in others from certain perspectives. And the cost was probably a little lower than I expected. You know, in 2012 dollars or whatever it was in the $25,000 to $30,000 mark. So you should probably expect, you know, something around the CPI variation. So maybe 4 or 5% more than that. Like maybe if the engineering company is lucky, 10%. I would say that given the amount of work, it's a pretty good deal. Particularly one of them had extensive GIS work and mapping work, which you don't have copies of, partly because the complexity of accepting that and then seeing if it was going to print and all those kinds of things was a bit beyond me. If people are interested in seeing the complete studies, they're each over well over 100 pages long. So bang for the buck, you know, even if you want to be really cheap about it, that's actually not a bad price per page. You'll see from just from the survey questions and the recommendations, the level of detail is actually pretty impressive. I did not include information, and this is part of the reason why I didn't give you the whole report. Each of these projects, each of these studies actually looked at individual wastewater permits in both the towns and listed by name and address each one of the wastewater permits, and we're able to identify using the wastewater permit database what, if any, issues there were, and we're able to sort of analyze literally property by property what the issues were or how a solution would work for them. And obviously, given that in both instances the client was a municipality, they spent quite a bit of time and effort looking at solutions for public buildings, including schools and post offices and things such as that. So with that as kind of context and background, I had a conversation with Brian and Jeff LaBelle at some point over the phone a couple of weeks ago, I guess, where we discussed the possibility of the Planning Commission engaging, if you like, in the first step of this study process, which would be to survey presumably some subset of the population in Norwich, you know, or some subset of the property owners. So not necessarily everybody, but target a geographic area, and then trying to think about what kinds of questions you could ask property owners and householders. They're not exactly the same thing, to try and establish the potential for doing more about wastewater. In other words, trying to identify what, if any, issues there may be. And then to some extent also, which is again a slightly different question, what are householders in particular, but all property owners' openness to participating in a collective solution, for want of a better term. And I use that because a collective solution could be a privately held collective wastewater treatment system. So you could imagine maybe 6 to 8 properties grouping together and solving a problem if they've got access to the right amount of space, to have a community septic system designed and maintained for their needs. Or you could think of a publicly owned or large community system that required a more complex arrangement of ownership and control. It's too bad that Jeff Goodrich is not here tonight. We actually had a precursor kind of conversation to this. So for Brian and Jeff LaBelle, this might be a little bit of a rerun. But we actually discussed some of these issues around permitting in the Affordable Housing Subcommittee meeting on Monday night. There are serious limits to the permitting process in Vermont, a regulatory kind of some regulatory barriers. I think the other thing that I overlooked to mention as part of the context, which I did mention on Monday night, 55% of all housing units in Vermont have access to municipal wastewater. In other words, 45% don't. Less than 2% of the land area of Vermont has access to municipal or private wastewater system. The rest, 98%, doesn't. These two figures are the lowest in the country. So think of other very sparsely populated, low density states like Idaho or Alaska even. They have higher figures than that. There's lots of contributing and different factors. It's interesting to think about that. It's even interesting to think about that in terms of even, say, New Hampshire or Maine, which you might also have expected to have pretty low numbers, but Vermont is significantly lower than those. So part of the context that I'm trying to provide here is that there is no deep commitment on the part of the state of Vermont to actually build, maintain, or fund the installation of municipal wastewater systems. This kind of infrastructure doesn't have a serious state commitment for whatever reason. So it's historical, and it's probably difficult to overcome that in any short period of time. It's just a very different context here from almost any other state. And so putting that in the background then also explains why you've got such limited opportunities to take advantage of state funds or state matched federal funds to actually solve the problem in the ways that you might see in surrounding states. Jackie's got a hand up. Melissa.
I'm sorry, could you say the percent of the houses again? I missed that.
You want, sorry, which number did you want?
The houses. You said 2% of the land has access
2%
to
of the land and 55% of the houses.
55%.
So remember, it's 55% of houses have access to a municipal wastewater system. That includes all of, Burlington. That includes Chittenden County. If you took Chittenden County out of that, you'd be well under 20%.
Right.
Because that's by far the vast majority of housing units in the state.
Yep.
And they're all on wastewater. As soon as you step out of the greater Burlington metropolitan area, you're kind of stepping off a cliff there.
Yep. Okay.
So that has ramifications, all through for our thinking about this, and up to and including, if you thought that you wanted to have a wastewater system that was managed by your municipality and you're happy paying for that, then you knew about that, then maybe you didn't select Vermont, right? So the people that consciously step towards moving into Vermont may actually move with the understanding and the expectation that they're going to be responsible for their own waste, right? And so the ethos and that kind of context might run pretty deep. So I don't know what the expectation of the residents of Norwich are relative to other parts of the state, but it may actually be that we find out that most people in Norwich sort of don't regard this as a problem because they sort of thought that they were going to have to deal with it themselves in the first place. A little bit like if you really couldn't or didn't want to drive a car and you wanted to have a social life and go to the store and work, you may not choose Vermont, right? It's just not hospitable to pedestrian and cycling activity only. Try and think of the number of people that happily live in Norwich and don't drive or don't have access to a vehicle. So it's that level, I think, of consciousness or whatever that it might be worth as a group just contemplating, what that means, which is not to say that the town doesn't need it or shouldn't work towards doing something about it or having a serious conversation about it. But I do think that context about Vermont is a really important place to start. So I see Brian's hand up, Melissa. So yeah. Yep.
Sure. Thanks, Melissa, and thanks, Rod, for presenting that context and for preparing all these materials. I think it's really helpful to see it. I think I understand it even more now than I did at the time of that conversation you referenced a few weeks back. Setting aside the particulars of the survey and the other elements of the study, my question really comes back to timing and sequencing. These kinds of studies look at one set of issues which are complementary to other issues that are important to the town's decision making. And so for me, it's just knowing when to bring in this kind of element and when to look at other kinds of research or technical assistance support. And so, you spoke about many things in regard to residents' needs or residents' pain points. That's not really the only, it's not by any means the only motivating factor for exploring this issue. And so when we think of the whole suite of potential pain points, potential stakeholders around wastewater, it's trying to find out where do we actually need help in decision making or in the advice that we give to the select board on decision making. And this may be relevant at some point, and other things might be relevant first or after as well.
Did you want me to respond or no?
No, I think where I'm at now is even with this context, which has been incredibly helpful. I don't know that today is the day to say this kind of study makes the most sense at this time. I just don't think, the discussion we're having exactly right now is the first in thinking about what makes sense in what order for putting together good recommendations, good guidance for the select board on this issue.
Leah?
Yeah, tied to that, I was struck by the packet of the needs assessment timeline. So I think that kind of maybe hops on to what Brian was saying as far as where are we in the discussing of this and how do we look at further discussions and further work. And if that was the intent of that timeline to help us make that decision as a draft, or were there other purposes of that timeline in the packet?
Okay, so when I spoke with, when we've spoken about this before, there's been this kind of conundrum amongst the group where I've cited these kinds of studies and said, communities that however a community gets there, when a community decides that they want to address the wastewater issue, for better or for worse, no matter what it is, this is the mode, this is the mode that they go through. And to get to the other side, which is either a no, we're not going to do anything about it, or yes, now we know as a community that this is going to cost us, with some order of magnitude problem, but this is going to cost us X number of dollars. It's going to take X number of years, and we're going to have to take these steps to do something about it, which includes up to and including town votes and working with the state and obtaining funding sources and more involved studies and a bunch of other stuff, right? But this is the study mode that you go through. One of the things that's key about both these studies is that on some level, both those communities, however scientifically they did it, and I use that word really in big inverted commas, however they did it, they got to a situation where they realized they had a problem that they wanted to address. And Brian's right to actually identify that it's not just the pain points of existing property owners. So hypothetically, there could be a different community somewhere else. So I am meeting this hypothetically, that is suffering population decline, or it's static and it has a lot of underutilized or vacant commercial property in a downtown, and it really wants to rejuvenate itself and really wants to encourage growth. And the conclusion it reaches is that most people who've got wastewater are okay with it, but they can't do anything meaningful about relatively dense commercial and residential growth until they do something about wastewater. And so they decide to do a study. So it might not be at all about the circumstances or problems that anyone's experiencing right now, but as a community, they've come together and said, we want to increase our population and increase our growth and increase our grand list. And we think the way to do that is to have wastewater treated at the municipal level or whatever it is in the village.
Right.
I can't think of a Vermont community that's done that, which in itself is also pretty telling, but that's a plausible question, right? Or a plausible approach. I think what I'm laying out in this timetable to answer Leah's question more directly is that in the discussion that I had, I think Brian might have dropped off and I was going to feed sheep at the time. So I don't have perfect recall. I was also freezing to death. But I was talking to Jeff and the way out the door. And I think that what we had come to the conclusion of was that doing some kind of preliminary, predominantly online survey, trying to establish what, if any, scope of the problem, is there a problem? What's the scope of it? Or what is the level of interest? Setting aside the problem, setting aside the question of is it a problem? What level of interest would people have in exploring wastewater solutions for Norwich? Does that ring a bell, Jeff LaBelle? Sorry, that was a bad.
Yeah,
play on words.
No, I mean, I think that's one way to proceed. If you're fit, I'll let you finish. I have some thoughts about that, but
So the timeline is really like, okay, take the first chunk of these studies, simplify it somewhat, try and establish in the COVID context by surveying people, because we're not going to get them together for a public meeting anytime soon, what, if any, issues there are and what, if any, interest there is in further exploring the wastewater problem. We all know that the Marion Cross School's got a problem. We've probably all got other anecdotal stories about other people's issues, but the one thing we know for sure is that Marion Cross has got a problem. And so we know it's out there as an issue on some level. Just try and find out more about what people's level of interest is. And I think that maybe, Brian, I can't remember whether you were still on the line or not, but that's sort of where we ended up, which we would just do a simplified, slimmed down survey to at least guide the planning commission to say, you know what, there's nothing really here, or, actually there's something here we would want to pursue, or even though we didn't get a good result, we still want to pursue something. That would also be an option, I guess. So did that answer your question, Leah? Okay, great.
Yep.
Jeff.
yeah, well, thanks for that, Rod. I can just lay out my own thinking about this, and I was part of that call and sort of, see if it's helpful at all. Like, to me, like the ultimate question we want to get to, right, is whether or not to connect to another wastewater system, right? Either on our own or as part of if Marion Cross decides to do it as part of the Dresden School District, right? So that's like the ultimate question. And there are kind of two pieces to that. One is whether we do it on our own. The other is whether we do it only, if we only have to pay the incremental cost, right, of expanding the pipe size, right, that the Dresden. So those are, to me, are like the big questions. And then how do you answer those questions are, number one, it would be useful to know if there's a demand for this among people who live downtown, right? And I think that's where the survey that Rod's describing could potentially be useful, right? If you found out that there were 50 or 100 property owners in the downtown area or business owners that really wanted to connect to us, that would be relevant information. It's not the only piece of relevant information, right? But then, that needs to be balanced, right, against the costs of a system, and then there's a bunch of other costs and benefits, right? What are the other benefits that would flow to the town from connecting, right? And what are the drawbacks to the town of connecting? And what I would like to see is kind of a systematic look at these costs and benefits, and some real amplification of them before we try to assess just like a popularity contest, right? With I just don't think asking people whether they want to do it or they don't want to do it without having some more informed conversation around cost and benefits would be very useful. So in that sense, I'm not supporting, I wouldn't support a survey at this point for that purpose. Like, to me, a survey would be useful for assessing demand of people who live close by, but not for trying to do a popularity contest. I was hoping that we could use a study to help us assess and sort of rigorously analyze these costs and benefits, right? Like, we could hire someone to take a look at it, try to flesh out, you know, here are like the 5 benefits, here are like the 5 drawbacks, here's what you should think about. You know, here's some rough approximate cost, right? And then we could, like, perhaps have a conversation. You know, it'd be great to get people from the community involved and have a conversation with them about the issues and really flesh them out, assuming that we think there's enough reason to think that we might want to go through. And then at that point, I think a survey would be really useful, right? Because that would be an informed conversation based, right? But what part of what Rod said is that we can't do a rough cost estimate. There's no such thing, that you need to do these big expensive surveys. So that's, I think that's paraphrasing it, but I think that's what he said earlier. And I respect that, but I don't think, I'm certainly not prepared to support a big expensive survey that sort of assumes that we're ready to move forward with a system when we haven't made that decision.
Calling on myself, my question, I guess, is, you know, we're talking about the surveys and talking about interest. I mean, do we have any updates from like Hartford? Because it seems like Hartford's where we want this waste to go. Do we know if Hartford would even accept our waste? Isn't that like, we need somewhere to go before we decide to do it, right?
Do you want me to answer that with
whoever wants to? I'm just
Okay.
curious, because it's like that.
I don't know what Roger knows. So I have different slides. Everyone has different slices. Roger's now embarrassed and he's gone away. So well, yeah, he's back. So as you probably know, because you read the Valley News more than I do, there's been a little bit of political, what's the word? Unrest of a kind in Hartford of late, and that's in addition to them being in the midst of the search process for a new town manager, which they've just successfully resolved, but she doesn't start till February. All I know is that the study that was commissioned by the town of Hartford to look at what was involved in having Marion Cross join is at least in close to the end, if not in draft form, and that Hartford has been mostly sort of beset with scheduling issues around how and when to consider that, and that Marion Cross has expressed some eagerness to move forward with it. But you know, given the rest of Hartford's issues, this, as you might imagine, is not necessarily on the top of the first page of the to-do list for them. So it's unclear when they're going to resolve it, and you know, that's their prerogative, I guess. The next part is, we know that Marion Cross has made the decision while the school's in session, you know, on site, that they're going to have the tank pumped on a regular basis. We understand they expect that that's going to go on for a couple of years. What we don't have is anything like any kind of documentation, because it's private. You know, Marion Cross is a private client. I understand that Pathways Consulting has been working with Marion Cross for a long time, looking at alternatives, which include the Peisch property, which is town property, other solutions, including rebuilding the wastewater system on the green, as well as joining Hartford, and has rough estimates of what each alternative would cost and what to use Jeff LaBelle's language, the costs and benefits of each. What we don't know is any of the information about their cost estimates, the length of time it would take, the size of the pipe, or what's involved in doing that. Up to and including who are the other customers that would offset the costs. We understand that properties with frontage on Route 5 South have been approached and are open or were open to joining in. But this is also all prior to COVID. Some very schematic plan was put forward that would involve the town, because Marion Cross cannot be an applicant to the state for this, but the town being an applicant to the state for community development block grant funds that would offset the cost of the Marion Cross connection to Hartford. This is the hypothetical plan, right? As far as I'm aware, there has been no formal discussion between the school board and the select board about the select board taking on that responsibility, and a responsibility of that nature is large enough in terms of the commitment that it would that the town would be making, that the voters may or may not be involved in that decision directly, but they presumably would want to be consulted with fairly rigorously prior to any select board determination that that was an appropriate thing to do. That raises a whole set of planning questions around land use and planning questions around finances and capital, and also town management questions. So in my experience, I don't know of a community in Vermont that's ever received a community development block grant that doesn't have a finance director and doesn't have a robust grants management program, because the responsibility would fall to the town to actually monitor the grant and maintain the grant. And these kinds of grants actually involve monthly reviews of the payrolls of the businesses that are beneficiaries, because one of the key ingredients in getting this funding, community development block grant funding, is that you have to demonstrate economic development, which is reduced to the number of jobs. And so the estimate here is at least 25 jobs would need to be created along Route 5 South, and that those 25 jobs would have to be identified by the employers, and a database would have to be maintained and refreshed monthly to confirm that it was those community development block grant funds that built that sewer system that was keeping those jobs. And most employers find that onerous and hand that off to the municipality. We don't have a municipality with the capacity to actually do that. The last time I worked in a municipality where that was taken on, they hired a staff person solely to do that. Okay, it was that significant. Now, it was a much bigger project and it was a much bigger number of employees, but the paperwork or the Excel spreadsheet work isn't that much less. So what I'm trying to say here and what I'm trying to emphasize is that there are a number of really large decisions that the town would need to make that are really important from a management standpoint, aside from the planning, the land use planning angle, that have not even been broached or discussed in any meaningful way or worked through in any meaningful way. And if we assume, for the sake of the argument, that Hartford says yes and Marion Cross therefore then says yes, that's when all that process would start. It's hard for me to estimate how long that would take or what's involved, or again, what the likelihood is that the voters of Norwich would want to go along with that. But there would be serious resource commitments that the town would have to make on the finance management side and grant management side that we're not in a situation to do. And we are still unable to fill the finance director position. So there's those things. The next thing would be, if we really were to take advantage of doing that with Marion Cross and wanting to increase the size of the pipe for an incrementally small cost, then we need to identify that what we were expecting is some change in the land use along the path of the sewer line, right? In other words, we would have to reasonably expect that there would be some pressure for renewed development in the Route 5 South area of town. The zoning is currently really old and out of date. That district is zoned as commercial industrial. It's not necessarily capturing the vision that the town plan laid out. And it's not really clear that the development that would occur as a consequence if it went with the existing zoning regulations would sit well with the community or even the planning commission. So we're not in a good situation right now to activate that. We'd have to do something about that. Then the next element is a significant amount of that land is subject to Act 250 permits, and therefore it's really unclear what, if any, development could take place and what it would look like as a consequence of trying to obtain an Act 250 permit. So we haven't done a careful assessment of what the scope for build out of Route 5 South is, regardless of the local zoning. Then the next element is that there are some very large property owners, including the Montshire Museum and the school district itself. And there's not too much reason to expect that either of them would want to actually sell their holdings and have it converted and developed into housing or some other use. And they've not articulated or expressed any interest in that. And to work those issues through with them would again be lengthy and involved and need to be rigorous and would take some time. And then lastly, if it's going to go in a ditch on the edge of Route 5, it's subject to wetlands permitting, the VTrans right-of-way, which is extremely difficult to build in for obvious reasons. In case they make a mistake and dig it up, they don't want to be sprayed with your waste. So they're usually pretty reluctant to participate in this. And that in itself is its own, regulatory issue or hurdle that has to be addressed. So there's a lot of things that are embedded in this very hypothetical, somewhat, very sketchily described. I don't mean, we don't have a lot of details here. And we don't have access to any of these documents because they're private documents, because they're subject to the client professional relationship between Pathways Consulting and Marion Cross School. And those documents, whatever documents they've got have not been shared. They don't have any obligation to share them. We don't know what's being speculated on. We don't know what's being assumed. Some of those issues that I just raised, particularly around the land use question, has a dramatic effect on what the potential amount of waste that the town of Hartford would be expected to receive. And they're not naive about this. They know that if they run a pipe from downtown Norwich, the village of Norwich, all the way to Hartford along Route 5 South, that they could reasonably expect over a 10, 15 or 20-year period, a huge increase in the volume of waste that they're going to end up having to process. That could be good news for them because it's customers. It could be bad news for them. We also don't know any of the details, the engineering details about what that system involves. If you walk, like really walk, from Marion Cross to the Hartford Town line at Fogs, you're going to go uphill, and then you're going to walk along a fairly flat section of land, and then you're going to go slightly downhill. You don't notice it in your car, but you do when you walk it. When you pump waste, you need a really big pump, and you need a backup pump because no one wants to go and fix a pump at 3 o'clock on a February morning when it's broken, which is usually when they do break because they freeze and then they break. And it's expensive and it's ugly, okay? So there's always a backup pump. They have a life expectancy of 10 years and the smallest one is more than $1 million. You'd probably need 2 just to handle Marion Cross. You got to pump it up the hill and then you got to let that waste run down the hill. Ask me why I know. There's pump houses. The first visitors area in Vermont is in Guilford, right? So as soon as you cross the border from Massachusetts, you get the Vermont Visitors Center. That is actually connected to the Brattleboro wastewater system, which is on the Connecticut River, some 7 miles away, and it's pumped, okay? And the state paid for the pumps the first time and then refused to pay for them the second time, and they're still negotiating what to do with the third time. It's only been there 20 years. The life expectancy of the pump in the beginning was 25 years. They're $1 million a hit, and it's hard to find people who want to work on them again at 3 o'clock in the morning in February, right? So Hartford's got some serious questions, and they're not getting serious answers, or if they've got serious answers, they're really mulling it, right? It's not a straightforward, oh yeah, we can do this, this is not a problem. They've got a perfectly operable system that's making them money, and they're okay with it. They don't need a new customer. If they're going to have a new customer, these are the questions that they're asking the customer. We don't know what answers the customer's been giving. We don't have access to any of that documentation. The town's not involved in any of those decisions. But if it's to go forward, because it will involve the town is going to have to be involved in those decisions. So whether the town wants it as a fait accompli at the end, or whether the town wants to get involved at the beginning and get a better understanding is up to the town.
Jeff, I think I saw your hand up first, and then Jackie.
No, thank you, Rod. this is part of the cost and benefit analysis, right? Is to understand what's involved and what are the benefits. So this is exactly the kind of thing that we should do before we spend $50,000 to $100,000 on a detailed survey to figure out and plan exactly how much it's going to cost to do it. So I totally respect the points. I think it seems to me that there would be benefit in engaging the town of Hartford and engaging the school district directly, asking to see the documents. It's true they don't have an obligation to share it, but it's also possible that they may want to share the results because they may want a cost sharing partner. And we're not promising ahead of time to be such a partner, but we could say, look, we are interested in trying to understand better kind of what are the costs involved and what, how much capacity could there be. I also think that, there ought to be, regardless of whether we decide to upgrade the pipe or not, there ought to be an intermunicipal agreement between the town of Norwich and the town of Hartford concerning what the costs that are involved in those sewer decisions, right? So people don't come and stick it to the town of Norwich later, right? And so it seems to me that type of agreement could potentially put a limitation on the number of housing units that can attach to the, could say, look, this is a liability for the town of Norwich, but because this is a liability for the town of Norwich, we're going to limit it to X number. I mean, I don't think it's necessarily a fait accompli that you open yourself up to an unlimited number of households. And I wouldn't want to, I think we would be irresponsible, frankly, to say that we're just going to open it up to an unlimited number. We would want to put limits on it. So the question really I have is, what is the structure for thinking through these issues in a detailed way and presenting them and analyzing them? Is that the kind of thing that we could bring a consultant on to help us think through without like thousands, tens of thousands of dollars? I mean, it's, people, I understand that there are, like you've already identified a lot of issues, right? You do, someone spends, 4 hours of work, who knows about this, writes it all down. We kind of talk about it. We analyze it. You do another 4 hours. I don't know. It doesn't have to be a huge project, I think, but it would really help to be able to structure this conversation and to be able to then figure out where are the gaps and where do we need more information, and to then, that's just my view.
I'm happy to write this up. I mean, I think that, what I just outlined, I'm happy to put in a memo that could be shared by the planning, by the planning commission with the select board. I mean, I think what I've tried to do here is really actually outline as, what we know, which is very little about the Marion Cross proposal. Given what we know, what could we surmise would be the obligations of the town, assuming that it was to go forward as it's been explained. We can get information from Hartford, I think, without too much trouble. And I think that the questions around the cost, we can get rough estimates from other engineering companies that would look at life expectancy, the capital cost, what it would cost to pay it off. We can certainly work through what the issues with the state are. So just to be really clear, even if we don't cost share with the school, even if we just handle the grant for the school, so the only clients for Hartford would be the school and King Arthur Baking and maybe the co-op, which was one of the proposals that was outlined by Pathways Consulting and Marion Cross School. So there will be basically 3 customers and a distance of 1.5 miles or 2 miles of pipe. So we could figure out what those volumes are, and we can figure out what the cost is. But even in that situation, the town is the backstop. If one of those businesses decides to go away, or the school, for whatever reason, and again, this is hypothetical, I'm not saying this is likely, but if the school has some challenge with actually making the payments, it's the town that's on the hook, no matter what, right? Even if there's no one but Marion Cross School and King Arthur Baking and the co-op as the beneficiaries. So I think that, I can certainly outline something that identifies each one of these issues, but I think if you're going to keep talking about it, then the way to move forward is to get really clear about what do we know, what do we don't know, and how do we go about finding out what we don't know.
I would,
yeah.
I would just say, I think that's great. Personally, I would just encourage us to try to be even-handed about this and not just look at all the liabilities. The liabilities are important. I want to understand them fully. But let's also try to think about and at least articulate the potential benefits so that we're weighing them side by side. And if there are issues that we have concerns about, let's try to find solutions. So I know it's your job to identify all the problems that could possibly happen and all the liabilities, but let's try when we're articulating it to try to talk about, because there are always costs and benefits, and there are
Right.
solutions to challenges. Let's just try to present both sides.
There is the potential for development on Route 5 South that the community, given the right processes, could really endorse and support and want to see. So yes, there's the potential for economic development and for social development, including housing of across a range. So yes, there are potential real benefits.
Okay, Jackie.
What I'd say there is that we would need to ensure a process that engaged the community so that could be identified, right? I mean, I'm not discounting that. So one scenario is that there is development on Route 5 South, and it's the kind of development that Norwich as a community can get behind, right? And then trying to scope out exactly how much of that you could expect, given the other things that I just outlined: who owns the land, what permitting it's already subject to, what are the regulatory constraints, what are the physical constraints. It's either wet, ledgy, or steep. There's challenges there. It's not Ohio. It's not gonna carve up easily here. But there is potential, and that would be really exciting and interesting to look at, I think.
Okay, I want to let someone else weigh in because Jackie had her hand up like 10 minutes ago. Jackie.
Yeah, thanks, Melissa. I think this is really good discussion, and we're trying to get to the question I think I'm trying to answer is, what do we need to do to be able to advise the select board appropriately on how they should proceed? I mean, I think that's our mission here, and Rod came back with this suggestion, from our last meeting. Those are the studies that are in front of us. Are we saying that those studies are more than we need at this time? Is that what we're saying? Are we saying we should just do it ourselves and write up the costs and the benefits? Brian, you had your hand up, but Melissa, how do you want to proceed? Because that's my question is, how do we best get to an answer, so that we can advise the select board? Here's what we've learned. Here's what we think we should be considering, given that Marion Cross is a problem that has to be solved for the community. Is there anything else that should be considered besides Marion Cross? That's what we're trying to get at here. Go ahead.
And just one clarification to build on Jackie's, and I'll get to you, Brian. I mean, we don't have any money to do too much, right? Like, so if we do a survey, it's us doing the survey and putting it out there at this point. Okay, I just wanted to be clear. So, I mean, some sort of survey might be our best option that we can create to start the process, and then it would have to build from there.
Without a budget, yeah.
Yeah, without a budget. Brian, did you want to go ahead?
Yeah, I mean, this is a question for the group. I don't have evidence to suggest that that a closer relationship, closer collaboration with the school would be so adversarial. I mean, the kinds of studies that Rod's describing that the school has already done, overlap in many instances with the ones envisioned here by these other towns' reports, at least on the technical side. And in some sense, the universe of solutions that the school can see for itself, bounds the ideas that we can contemplate as well. And I just can't see it being so adversarial if we approach it from the standpoint of finding opportunities that reflect our shared interests and that treat treat the parties of the school and the town as potential investment partners. I don't see a need to do a technical study that replicates something they've already done or they're already interested in pursuing. I just don't know why we have to imagine ourselves in a silo as opposed to exploring a partnership together with them and potentially with businesses and residents as well. I don't want to wait until a study is done to say, okay, school, now we know what we're going to do because we did this study. Why aren't we doing that now? So maybe the question is to the town or to the group, like the school board, both Dresden and for Marion Cross, it's a public body. They have public meetings. There are neighbors and friends. Like, do you really think they would be so resistant? I mean, we've had many exploratory conversations already. Tom has come to our meeting. Like, why can't we escalate these conversations and look more in depth at the technical and financial side with them? Does everyone think this would really just run into a brick wall? I don't have evidence to suggest that.
Stuart Richards.
Leah had her hand up.
Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't see that you had your hand up. I'll let the planning commission member speak first and then Stuart.
Thank you. Well, I appreciate Rod for bringing up and presenting the information and the other comments that have been presented. I think as part of the discussion, the way my brain is looking at it is in a way to reflect back what some people have said is there's some questions that we have. There's some information that we have that we may or may not want to attribute to a source to say, is that source the one we want to follow or not? And then there are answers that we need to find out, whether that's reaching out to members from Marion Cross or others that we can then determine who's making the ask. I agree with Brian that I think, and Jeff, who have mentioned that I think it's worth asking. It's worth connecting with our community to find those answers in the time frame so that we can feel good about the recommendation that we make. That's my thinking so far. I think there's some pieces that we want to put together so in a way we can show to ourselves and prepare to show to others how we've come to this decision. That's what I'm thinking so far. And then I just have another comment that's in a bit of a side. I'm not sure if people who've been speaking before are using survey and study synonymously. So I'm just like survey of people or survey of land. As we continue this discussion, it would be helpful to clarify that. Thank
you. Stuart, you're muted.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Stuart Richards, 82 Elm Street. So there, just to try and be helpful here, and I'm not sure if you're aware of this or not, but there have been at least 3 or 4 letters from Pathways describing various costs and various possibilities. And I'm not sure if you've reviewed those or you haven't reviewed those, but they certainly shed some light, not perhaps as much light as you would like, but they certainly shed some light on the costs to hook up to Hartford. But you should be aware also that as far as Marion Cross is concerned, having followed this fairly closely and discussed it a number of times with Tom Cannon and the regional engineer, Hartford is not the only possibility, certainly, that's being examined by Marion Cross. There's at least a half a dozen properties in town that are under consideration. And I can't tell you, and I'm not sure that Tom Cannon can tell you either at this moment, which of those solutions is the best solution from the standpoint of Marion Cross. But all I'm saying is that Hartford is one certainly important consideration. but it's certainly not the only one. And I'm not so sure it's the favored one because of the costs and other things that are involved with dealing with a larger entity than the town of Norwich. There are at least 3 documents that you probably have and you probably have reviewed that I think have a bearing on this. You know, the first perhaps is a sewer study. I was a member of the committee back in 2005. That particular document talks a bit about the environmental considerations in the central village. We at the time, and I don't think this has changed because soils don't generally change very much over time, at least not over the short term. We're not talking thousands of years here. We're talking just a very short time relative to geologic kinds of things. So at that time, we interviewed several town engineers. And what they told us was that there's not an environmental need in terms of system failures in the town itself. So that's something that I think needs to be factored into the conversation. There certainly may be other reasons or needs that need to be met. When we talk about surveys, I think both the 2005 survey and the 2018 survey, the 2005 survey, which had close to 1,000 respondents.
Yeah, I think sorry, Stuart, I don't
We
mean to
know
interrupt,
those.
but I think we
We
are
know those.
everyone here has
Yeah,
looked.
we know
at-
that.
I'd like to make a point, and I'd like to have it on the record, and that is that there was very little enthusiasm for a municipal sewage system, and there was very little enthusiasm for paying the money that would be involved in a municipal sewage system. So, you know, I just would appreciate that receives some consideration because of the number of people who were involved and who answered those surveys. The first one, close to 1,000 people. The second one, about 500 people. So you can
Okay.
survey again, to your heart's content. But I think that those need to be considered and factored in. So
Okay, thanks, Richard. Roger, I think you've had your hand up for a while, so.
my name is Stuart.
Well, okay, I'll give you that, Stuart. Sorry.
You mean I know my own name? Oh, my goodness. How exciting.
Some days I know my name, sometimes I don't, but I know Roger's name and I saw a little hand by his name.
Hi, so Roger, Route 132. My comment is from the benefit of listening to this conversation, which has a really high level of discourse. And, for me, what I'm really hearing from this conversation is like scope of work. I guess I kind of want to echo what I'm hearing a little bit in Jeff Lubell's comment about what is the professional services that can be employed to really engage a meaningful and deliberative process with these identified stakeholders. I think obviously like our professional staff, Rod, has like outlined like very, with great fascination to me, like all of the issues, but it's unclear to me what the governance is on how to like shepherd these questions through to all of our stakeholders. I find it like obviously really intriguing that like one of the stakeholders is an independent company that is also a member of this commission. Like that in and of itself should tell you that you should be engaging professional services outside of outside of this group to really think about how to bring people to the table. And the last thing I'll say is, I think we shouldn't fool ourselves. There's a lot of regional, if not state interest in Norwich because of where it's situated in Upper Valley, where it is next to a hospital and a college. If you are a community that says, hey, like we are interested in taking on wastewater, we are interested in possibly living our values of affordable housing, we want to engage in a deliberative process, I imagine that there must be, funding sources for that scope of work of an individual who would begin that deliberative process. And so that's the only other thing I would reflect back, that, we're a very unique region in a very unique situation. People think that the collection of our small towns make us as important as Chittenden, but it's only with governance would we be able to even see if that's true? So anyway, I'm obviously on a different board, but I just wanted to reflect back like what I'm hearing from the high level discourse. So thank you to all of you. I learned so much.
Thanks, Roger. Rod, did you have something?
Yeah, I
you
just want to follow up. I really appreciated Roger's remarks. The one thing I want to say is, it's too bad that that Brian's left, but I didn't mean to sort of cast this in an adversarial way, except to say, you know, I think where the approach I was attempting to outline was there are different interests here, and different issues and different roles and responsibilities, and I appreciate Roger's observation about governance too, because I think that what I'm trying to get at here is the Planning Commission's got a role even inside the governance process for Norwich, and foregrounding certain things and working through the issues, including what the vision is. Is the vision for Route 5 South now consistent with our goals and values? Is it consistent with the town plan? You know, what if anything would we want to transform this area into? Do you need municipal wastewater to do that? How practical is that? That could be a completely separate approach. It still sort of leads you back to the same question. And then I have to, you know, I want to emphasize all the interactions I've had with Tom Camden and the Marion Cross School have been really convivial and really totally professional, just totally fine. The issue is that we are still dealing with tiny little pieces of information that are kind of like spread all over the place, and they're not being brought together systematically. For us to be able to do that as a planning commission, and for us to do that as a town, I think it's raising the question of how are we going to address this issue, and how are we going to manage it as a series of questions, to actually to foster and build those relationships. So rather than thinking of, it's the last thing in my mind to actually have an adversarial context with the school, I'm just wanting to be respectful that the school has got a contract with it. You know, they're a client to a professional service, you know, a professional engineer, and they're not obligated to share that stuff, and vice versa. Some of it's in the public realm. That's great. We've seen some of that, and we can get a hold of the rest of it. But rather than thinking of this as adversarial, I do think it's important to see I think we're at this inflection point. If we're going to keep on going, talking about this, we actually sort of do need to settle down as a planning commission even, and start thinking sort of systematically about, well, what's in the town plan? What do we envision? Where do we want to be? And what kind of infrastructure and resources are we going to need to do that? And then stepping back to those reports, one of the things that really intrigued me about the reports was particularly the Franklin example, where it had two very obvious communities. So and scaled sort of solutions at very different scales. And there was some conversation about this at Affordable Housing on Monday night. It could be, for instance, that for whatever reason, say the Route 5 South project doesn't happen, it still could mean that there's a need to actually explore wastewater issues in and around the village with a different kind of solution. Even if you take 10 houses and you find a collective system for them, or you find an area of town that could accommodate up to 10 new houses on the edge of the village, and it would have a collective system. So the kind of research that those studies got into, and I want to use the word study here, not survey. I really mean study, Leah. I mean, those studies were actually really detailed and really effective at saying, okay, you've got this cluster, you've got these soils which have got this kind of suitability for a system. You got this kind of availability. Yeah, you could build out this neighborhood this much with this kind of a system, and it would cost you $600,000. So, you know, like, what do you want to do about that? So I do feel like I don't think we're ready for those kinds of studies now. I agree with Jeff and Brian, but I do feel that ultimately that some version of that, if we're going to address the future of the village and the future of development in town, up to and including what we would need to do to make a meaningful shift in the cost of housing, could explore those questions. It's just, for now, it's a matter of when do we get there and what path do we take? And I certainly just mostly wanted to say, I don't feel like it's an adversarial relationship with the school now, and I don't expect that to happen in the future. But
Jeff.
Yeah, thanks for the clarification, Rod. I think there are three things that need to happen, and in a perfect world, we would have money to hire a consultant to help us do all three. But I'll just articulate what they are, and then we can figure out how we do them. We might just have to roll up our sleeves and divide up the work. So one is to engage in the next level of conversations with the school board, right? To really understand the costs that they're seeing, think through, kind of really understand where they are in terms of their conversations with Hartford and whether they would be open to partnering, saying we're not sure we want to do it, but we're just trying to explore it to really understand what our options are. Is that something that they would entertain? What would be involved? You know, how would that work? I mean, really just sort of having an exploratory conversation at that next level of detail, right? To really flesh out what that would look like and what the options are, and to be able to report back to the Planning Commission about kind of, here's what we talked about might happen. Here's like the timing, the sequence, the rough cost, like that would be like one thing, right? The second thing is, I think it would be really useful to just get a sense for whether there are people in the downtown area or along the Route 5 corridor who may not have been approached, who would be interested in signing up for the system. Like, to me, it wouldn't matter, right? If I knew there were 30 housing units downtown that said, if there was a system, I would definitely want to sign up in the next 5 years. They don't have to tell them, they don't have to tell us why, right? But, you know, that they would do it. You would know that you would have a, you know, at least some customer base, right? So that that might be a survey that we might be able to conduct ourselves. And I would suggest it should focus really on whether there would be a demand for the service among people that are sort of reasonably proximate to downtown, just to Marion Cross, just so we have a sense, you know, and it would be useful to talk to the businesses and not just to the residents. And that might be something we do ourselves. And then the third thing is to have a really nice structured presentation of the sort of pros and cons. What are the issues, you know, the challenges that Rod laid out, the possibilities. We could probably do that ourselves, right? If we was, you know, kind of assign, if somebody were willing to step up and serve as a reporter, and we could all feed information to that person and they could consolidate it and then they could present it and then we could comment on it on sharing. You could imagine how that might happen. Again, it would be nice to have a consultant, but I think that would be, so I think those three things would help us move forward. And then I feel like after that, we could decide whether we think it's worth taking it to the next level. And at some point, there would need to be a process to engage the public, because we can't move forward without doing that. But I feel like there's a lot more work that needs to be done before we're ready for that.
So Jeff, how would you suggest the engaging with the school board? Like, would you invite Tom back to another meeting of ours, or would someone, you know, go talk to him? Or
You know, there's the open meeting law issue that we just need to sort of wrestle with, right? We can't form a subcommittee or anything like that. But, you know, we could ask Rod to you know, we give him some instructions. He's a town employee. We can ask him to do X, Y, and Z. The other option would be for one of us to volunteer to do it. But I think somebody needs to have the responsibility, or to take on that responsibility, right? Of having that conversation and feeling authorized to do that, you know. And it has to be really super clear that we're not committing at this point. It's just an exploratory conversation.
Jackie?
I just want to emphasize, as part of that conversation, the only option is not Hartford. There are other options being considered, and so we should explore all of those options, and I assume that would come out of it. But
that's a great point, Jackie.
Yeah.
Because I even, like, if they decide to
I don't want to jump to Hartford.
Yeah, well, also, right, well, let's just say they decide, for example, like, you remember when we were looking at the property kind of by the river as a possibility, right?
Yep.
And it turns out that you know, you couldn't do that because that's, you know, but if it turns out there's a property right next door and they work out an arrangement, there might be excess capacity that could be used to support other things. So it's really, it's just like exploratory
Yeah.
conversation about what
Yeah.
are the opportunities for us to work
Just-
together.
I have to
I
stay really open about that. I want to stay really
Yeah.
open.
That's
That's
great.
Good.
But it
Okay.
needs to be very constructive and positive and not just focus on the negatives. I think we have to make sure
Yep.
whoever does it feels like it's about exploring possibility. Doesn't mean you don't surface challenges, but like first you start by exploring possibility, right?
Exactly.
Rob,
So I think what I'm hearing from Jeff and to some extent Jackie too is it gets us back, I think, to the work that you could reasonably expect to undertake through the zoning rewrite, which is to look at the existing zoning districts, look at the existing settlement pattern in Norwich. I guess here we're really focusing on, if you like, a kind of a corridor between the village and the river, you know, so not all of Norwich, but, you know, a chunk of Norwich, small chunk when you think about the entire area of Norwich. And then really think through how to engage the public about a vision for that area, you know, going forward. And I think there's lots of opportunities to think about and think through. And then, you know, but I feel like, and it's important not to just look at all the costs and obstacles of anything. So I do see, I know that it sounds like that's going to elongate the process, and I don't mean it in that way necessarily, but I do feel like with some thought we should be trying to think about how to sequence this kind of work that we're doing with some of the larger projects that are also identified in the town plan. So to take Jackie's point, set aside the question of whether it's going to be Hartford and whether it's going to be $3 or $3.5 million, or it's going to take 5 years or 3 years or whatever it is. Just if you set those kinds of urgent, pressing questions aside for a little while and just think about what are the questions for Norwich as a community to resolve. I would say if you're going to talk about some kind of a model that assumes a certain level of residential growth in and around the village, you probably will encounter on some level the question of wastewater on some level, you know, and regardless of which end of the village it is or which side, you know, wherever it is. And so this won't be, you know, the kind of explorations that we're doing around wastewater won't be wasted, but there's a way in which I'm trying to think through now how to make sure it plugs in effectively to the larger questions that we've got. I guess it's the one way I'd try and say it. And then again, I think it does call forth the need for the community to really engage around it. And I guess from the land, so I'm focusing on the land use question right now, but there are other questions that are other bodies in town, you know, like the select board or whatever, are going to have more responsibility for. And so thinking through how to parcel out this work, but still keep it coordinated, I think is an interesting thing to think about right now. But yeah,
so how do we start? Like, what is our day one? Are we going to authorize Rod to go talk to the school board and talk to Tom about the questions that we have? How do we like operationalize this and actually get going?
I'll work on the presentation.
Thanks, Jackie. That's
What presentation?
You said step 3 was the presentation.
Structured
matter,
pros
just
and
work on it.
cons, structured
you
Sorry,
said-
pros and cons.
you'll work on the pros and cons of structure.
No, the presentation is collecting all the information that whoever gathers, and I will put it into a presentation. You said step 3 was, you know, step 1 was engage with the school, right? Step 2 was survey the townspeople if we decide that's a good idea. Step 3, put together the presentation.
No, I'm sorry. That wasn't what I meant. What I meant was that step 3 is a structured sort of analysis of pros and cons. So someone needs to sort of be willing to accept information that people have about pros and cons, assemble it into a document, and really be able to then they could present back to us. And then
I understood that. That's what you meant.
Okay, it's not just a presentation, it's like a structured sort of
Synthesis.
analysis of pros and cons. Is that something you're open to taking on, Jackie?
Yeah. Yeah, I think I understood what you said.
Okay, I'm sorry.
But yes, okay.
I would be willing to volunteer to, if it was acceptable, to talk to the school board and try to just have some conversations about what this might look like and just explore that.
Ernie, I'm sorry, you had your hand up before too.
Okay, okay. Jeff just said something that was important anyways. But I'm just wanted to say, I'm not sure I understand why not simply directly asking, for instance, Mr. Camden to come to the, to the planning commission and talk to us, put it on the agenda and talk to us about what is going on. I think Brian is very, very correct when he says that it's probably, there's probably not a significant adversarial relationship between the town and the school at all. I think there shouldn't be. I mean, it's our school. And I can't see why that wouldn't, the most direct and simple approach to this wouldn't be a good way to start.
We've
Just
had him here before.
ask what they want. Just as something to start with. What do they want? Because we know we need something to do. School has to be dealt with one way or another. So that's kind of the focal point of this entire issue, really.
Okay, so you'd rather have him come to us than us go to him, is basically what you're saying.
You can look at it that way. I mean, I just don't think that, I think we could all go to the school. It doesn't really matter.
Well, we really
First of all,
can't.
it's gonna be a Zoom.
No, we
anyway.
can't. You're not allowed.
It's going to be a Zoom anyways. But what I'm getting at is that there's no reason that, there can't be a non-adversarial relationship between the planning commission and the school. That's the simplest way I can think of it.
And I think we're all in agreement about that. I'm not sure where that came from because
Only because I'm not sure of all these, to me, that seems that I'm not sure we know very much. I don't know practically anything about where the school is going right now. Okay. And I don't think anyone does because everyone's been talking a lot about how, I think Rod said we only have a lot of tiny little pieces here and there that we've got to pull together. And there's been other discussions about, Marion Cross's information. They don't have to share, so on and so forth. And what I'm hearing, and by the way, I'm really pleased about the way this meeting is going tonight. The amount of information that Rod did an incredible job of bringing this whole slew of complicated interactions and dynamics to at least to my attention, and I'm really happy. And I've heard a whole pile of good discussions and responses to what Rod has brought to the table and so on and so forth. So let me just say that what it seems to me is that all of a sudden I started hearing that we have this sort of complex set of ways of getting started when we're really not even sure where we're going to go with this yet. All we know is right now, as far as I can tell, that we have one central point that we have to deal with, which is Marion Cross. They're sort of the sore spot that needs to be fixed or healed or whatever you want to call it. And all the rest of the stuff will sort of grow from that point. And so that's why, to me, it seems the school is the first place to start when it comes to the wastewater issue. Because for all we know, they may be the only thing that has to worry about wastewater. We don't know that there's anyone on Route 5 is going to be interested, or we may not be able to get it to them anyways, or any number of problems. But at least to know what the school's favorite, where they think they're going to end up now would be a good place for us to start with this, because that gives us some
I'll agree on that.
tangible information.
Jackie?
Yeah, I just want to point out, I think it was our July meeting, and I think it was around that time frame that we had, Tom Candid did come to our meeting, and we did speak to him on this topic. And I think the next, as I recall, the outcome of that is, we went to the select board. I mean, and then the select board asked us for a recommendation. So anyway.
Yeah, it's
Uh, Yeah, I mean, Tom was also, and please correct me if you remember differently, but he acknowledged that there hadn't been any conversation with the select board. Maybe that would be a good idea. And so anyway, I think we tried to make that happen, but the result was they're really looking for a recommendation from us, which I can understand. Select board is looking for a recommendation from us. So by all means, have him back, but we should be clear that he's been here and what's our, why are we having him back? That's all.
Okay, Jeff, I think I saw your hand up first, and then Ernie.
Yeah.
Oh,
and I-
I'm sorry, I didn't see Claudette's hand, and I don't know when in the order.
Oh,
Yep.
yeah.
Yeah, let me go quickly if that's all right. And then I would just say that I'm all for having Tom come back at some point, but I think what's needed is something that needs to happen offline, which is really the brainstorming of possible ways for the town and the school district to collaborate, and really to kind of lay it out and say, like, we think there's 3 possible scenarios here, and just to kind of explore them and map them out. That's like the process that would help me at least understand kind of what the options are, and be able to flesh out and feed into our pros and cons process. So I think somebody, it can be me, it can be somebody else, just needs to have that conversation.
Okay, Ernie, did you have a follow-up?
Yeah, well, two sort of questions, actually. First of all, I'm not quite sure what we mean by I think Jeff just said an offline process, and I'm not sure I understand exactly what that is. And I'm also not very comfortable with just 1 or 2 individuals knowing and then disseminating this information back to the group. It's not a very big group, and it seems to me that we all should be when any of this, any kind of information gathering, if we're gonna all of us should have the same knowledge about these issues. And I'm not very comfortable with the idea of people going out and bringing back information to me alone. I'm interested now in, seeing how the evidence is developed and so on. And I don't really want to just have to depend on somebody else's thought processes spoon feeding me information. So that's partly why I want to see Jack Candon. Aside from the fact that coming back, if he was there in July, we're talking 7-8 months later, things have changed, and there's more development. He probably is a bit more knowledgeable, or there's a bit more, the issue's been a bit more developed, so there's more information to be shared. But like I said, I also am not comfortable with just 1 or 2 individuals going and then bringing the information back. I really don't like that process at all.
Okay, thanks, Ernie. Claudette, did you have something to say?
Yeah, really just briefly. I did have a conversation with Tom back in the early fall, I want to say, and he was still in the midst of struggling to meet with the Hartford Select Board, or with at least Dan Frazier. So I don't think that and he was going to reach back to me when he had that conversation with Hartford. So I haven't heard anything, so I'm making an assumption that he hasn't connected. That's it.
Thanks, Claudette. Appreciate that information. Rod?
Yeah, just to support Claudette there, my sense is that it hasn't come back up at the select board level at Hartford at all in the time. I think Roger might even know, or maybe it's better to say Roger used to know select board members in Hartford. I don't know what's going on, but
it has not been before the Hartford Select Board as an agenda item for sure.
Yeah, it certainly hasn't, because I've been monitoring their agenda and it's not come up. And as far as I know, you know, I think it's probably reasonable to assume at this point that Tom hasn't had a conversation yet. And I don't know what the story is exactly.
Okay, so how do members want to approach this if we can just take the school part? Do we want to appoint someone to go talk to Tom? Do we want to inquire and see if Tom has any updates and wants to come back to our meeting? What do people want to do? Leah?
Well, it seems at the very least, there's a request for information, whether it's scheduling or who does it, the request needs to occur. Because it's possible he can come back and say, I got nothing. But I think the request will help us as we're filling out our pros and cons and information that we have and do not have. My position is I do not mind whether it's a planning commission member who makes the request, or if we ask Rod to do it. I do think at some point when the information is going to be shared and presented, I agree that I think coming to the planning commission to present that information is fine. But if we're teeing him up with the request of saying, this is what we're looking for, I don't think that request needs to be made in in the planning commission meeting. I think it can be made in a request.
Jackie?
Yeah, one thing we know that's happened since all of this and since Claudette's meeting as well is they made the decision to truck the waste out. And I guess as a short-term solution, but which could go on for who knows how long. And I think that's to buy some time. I did hear in some forum that I was at that there certainly is nothing for the town to vote on at this upcoming town meeting. They're not prepared for that. And they've also been embroiled in COVID for the last 10 months, as the rest of us have. So COVID and the budget and the changes in the state payment structure, et cetera. So anyway, I know there's been a lot of other things that are more worrying. And my sense of it is the trucking out of the waste is a way to put this on the back burner. So it might be worth having Tom to the meeting, to our meeting here, just to discuss the lay of the land. Okay, we understand you're buying some time, but how should we go forward? How can we all go forward? The school with the town, so that we're, all in the same boat planning for what should be next. Does that make any sense?
Okay. Yeah, Jeff?
I think Leah had her hand up first and then.
No, go ahead.
I'm happy to have him back. I mean, if you think about the work that needs to happen, though, it's not work that is conducive to necessarily happening in the middle of a meeting, right? I mean, I think it's not necessarily only Tom that needs to talk to. We need to talk to whoever works for Tom, right? Who's thought about that, who has access to the documents, right, that we're looking for with the costs, who could help us think through what would be involved. Like, you want to ask what would be involved if the town were to partner with the school. What would that look like? Just help us understand what that would look like. What would be the timeline? What would be the options? How would we go about it? How would we think about it? It needs to be sort of mapped out. So there needs to be like a working meeting, right, with a bunch of people from them, and whoever it is from us, and who's going to be designated to do that. And that's just the kind of meeting that happens all the time when two parties are talking about how they might work together. And then once you have that, you flesh out a series of options. You then come back to the meeting, you talk through the options, you bring those people back. Everyone has access to those people. They can talk through it. It's not like anybody is hiding anything. It's just somebody needs to do the work to flesh out those options.
Jackie?
What if we do this? If we plan to have, invite Tom or his, to the next meeting, and if Jeff, if you want to have discussions with him between now and then, I don't see, go for it. I mean, that's your prerogative, go for it. But I feel like we could do both. I feel like we could, but I agree. I like to be prepared for meetings. I don't like to walk in and say, okay, let it rip. I find pre-work very helpful, so I'm prepared for meetings. So I think that would be great if that happened. And then have Tom at the meeting. If you just had the discussion with him, everybody's ready for the meeting, we can have a meaningful discussion. So we're not thinking about this for the first time when we get in there. I think that'd be good.
Okay, I'm fine with that. Jackie, you're fine with that. Leah, it seemed like you were fine with that as an idea.
Yeah, teeing him up for, for the presentation. I don't think there's any point in inviting him if that's, and then have it need to evolve. And my concern right now, I know you're trying to get me to, you're asking if I'm saying yes or not. A deeper level in this question too is, looking at the timeline of this, do we have enough time, or do we want as a planning commission to have enough time to say, do we do some work before our next meeting, or do we wait to the next meeting to do the work? That's what I'm hearing. And so I don't mind if we use this time. I think it's a good use of time to make the requests and work with the people that we're going to be inviting to the next agenda.
Okay, so Jeff, you want to be the one to reach out to Tom,
I'll
or?
have to reach out to him.
Okay, so when you reach out to Tom to find out what's going on, you'll also ask him if he wants, if he's.
I will ask Tom to come to the next meeting.
Thank you.
And I'll chat with him informally about the kinds of issues we want to talk about. And then we'll all be together and we can talk, hopefully he can come to the next meeting.
Okay, because I just want us concrete doing something. So that's something.
There was also a mention of asking Rod, or Rod offered to put what he mentioned in a write-up, just for, and I appreciate that. I think that would be very helpful. The way I interpreted that was that write-up could also be part of the larger pros and cons structured of information. Am I correct in that? Yeah, okay,
Yeah.
Thank you. So it sounds like that's also something that we'll be doing too.
That'd be good.
Okay, so Rod will do that if that's okay with him. That'd be great. That'd be really helpful.
Is Rod, just a point of clarification, sorry, Jeff, can I interrupt? Is that all right? Is Rod then sharing that information with the document that Jackie offered to put together?
Don't worry. Yeah, don't worry about me. Don't worry about me. Don't worry about me. Don't worry about me.
Suggest a process actually for integrating that. I mean, my suggestion is that Rod write up, he clearly has a lot of ideas about kind of the things we need to be careful about, and we should and the possibilities. And if my suggestion would be that everyone shares their thoughts and their perspectives about the pros and cons, with Jackie, and Jackie can sort of integrate it into something that you would then bring back to the next meeting, and share back
Perfect.
a consolidated
I love that.
version. Obviously Jackie should feel free to add her own pros and cons, and thinking about it. And then at the next
We
meeting, we
review.
could sort of talk it through and see what
Okay,
else.
so we'll all email Jackie our pros and cons as well as Rod, and Jackie will include her own. Jackie,
Yeah.
when would you like our pros and cons by?
Well, thank you for asking, Melissa.
By the way, I have a potential conflict with the next meeting, so I'm a little worried about the Tom Cannon thing at the next meeting, but
When are we supposed to meet? Is it the
25th?
February 25th.
25th? Is
Yeah.
it the 25th?
yeah, but
Okay.
it's a Jewish holiday, so I might not be able to be there.
Oh.
But don't plan around me. I just won't be there.
So just while you're kind of getting your calendars organized and stuff, I think it's possible that there'll be some resolution to the Hartford angle on the Marion Cross problem, for one of I don't know how the best way to describe it. I think it's likely that it's going to come up at the next Hartford Select Board meeting, which I'm assuming is like roughly 2 weeks from now, because I think they were meeting earlier this week, like on Tuesday. I think they meet Tuesdays. So that'll be before the February meeting. And I guess just as a sort of a heads up, Tom might not have a whole lot more to say until that event on that topic. But then while I've got your attention, I'm happy to write up basically what I said tonight like lay it out and construct it. It may be of use to the thing that Jackie's working on, and I certainly would want to try and identify what the pros and cons were, or at least what the pieces of, think of it more like a jigsaw puzzle. I'm
Yeah.
thinking of lots of different pieces to the jigsaw
Yep.
puzzle. So to get a coherent picture, a complete puzzle, these are the things that you need to find,
Yeah.
right? And then lay them out so that you solve the puzzle. So it's not a adversarial versus, collaborative thing, and it's not a pro versus con thing. It's just,
Yeah.
I'm thinking of it in terms of problems, in terms of identifying the puzzle pieces. Once we've got the puzzle pieces out on the table, then we can arrange them into a picture that we might like.
Yeah.
So think of it like that. And then I'm happy to do that. And that may inform, so if you go back to that kind of very rustic Gantt chart that was included in this week's packet,
Yeah.
a bigger Gantt chart that shrinks down tonight's chart into like one strand, and then there's other things that will need to get done. And I just want to circle back and say, it is really important as part of the Planning Commission's larger set of tasks that we look at the zoning question. And of course, this informs it. And of course, the zoning question informs the whole wastewater discussion. Those two things are like locked on some level together, which is not great from the timeline point of view in a certain kind of way. But if we're going to engage the community, it's unavoidable and important. And it's the key. It's one of the key things that the Planning Commission needs to do. And so maybe we, I'm trying to spin it as a positive. At least there'll be progress towards one of the other things on the town plan, which is work on the zoning. So, yeah.
Good. Okay, so you asked me for a date. I'm sorry. Why don't we say?
Are we trying to find an alternate date for
Yeah,
February?
do we want to find an alternate?
Find an
date?
alternate date?
Do you want to try and do that?
Sure.
Yeah, that's okay with me.
Is that all right with you, Jeff?
I mean, yeah. Is there a better date for you guys? I mean, another date that
Do you have
works?
any alternate dates in February?
Well,
Any other date?
For you.
I mean, Valentine's Day is perfect.
Yeah, Valentine's Day.
Oh yeah, that's always a good one.
I feel like I always have meetings and stuff.
We could do it like the 18th, or Rod, you have those other groups that you have to facilitate. Does that work?
Yeah, it's kind of never ending.
No, but I mean the DRB, are they meeting on the 18th?
Yes, they are. In fact, we're hearing an appeal.
Okay.
What about March 4th? Like,
Yeah.
just push it back 1 week.
March 4th. Okay, let's go
it's
forward.
fine with me. It's fine
The
for me.
proposal would be to meet twice in March.
Well, it would,
That's
instead of
not
meeting 4 weeks apart, we meet 3 weeks apart, but it's,
Yeah, that's not bad because February is a short month, right?
yeah.
So meet 4th of March, and then
And then the last week in March,
The
25th.
25th.
Or you can meet on April 1st. I mean, that way, if you want to keep them 4 weeks apart, you could do 4th of March, April 1st, and then
Well,
April 29th.
Well, April 1st is another holiday week, but I'm just
Oh, is
saying,
it?
What holiday?
Passover. It's the week though, but yeah.
Oh, I haven't even looked at Passover. You're right.
That's Passover? Okay, I don't even see it.
Passover is Saturday night and Sunday night. We're still
Hmm.
looking here.
okay. So I can do February the 4th. I think the DRB is kind of jammed up.
Not February 4th, it's March 4th.
Oh, we're talking March 4th. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, hopefully things will have calmed down by then,
Okay.
but you never know.
So we're changing. Ernie, oh, I'm sorry. Melissa
okay.
couldn't say to Ernie.
I just wanted to ask, there's two dates here now. We're
Yeah.
changing the meeting to March 4th, which I'm completely in favor of, and I would have brought it up. Someone else did. Because I don't want anyone left out for this kind of stuff. So that was important to me. But Jackie's date, I'm still waiting to hear what that's going to be too. And I assume it's going to be related to when we.
Yeah.
So
Yes.
Yeah.
If I can have, can we say February 25th, which was going to be our planning commission meeting? Okay, so I need info from you by February 25th.
And then,
Perfect.
yeah, I'm good for.
Info is the mosaic. It's the puzzle pieces. It's the pros,
Right.
the cons, all the texture. Great.
Okay, great.
Okay.
All right.
So March 4th is the next meeting date for the planning commission, yeah?
Yeah.
Yes,
And then the deadline for Jackie is February 25th, right?
yes.
Correct.
Okay.
So is that are we good on wastewater for a minute?
Yeah, I think that was good.
That was good. Sorry. I just, there's so many other wonderful things to talk about. But I am glad that we have some action items.
Yep.
Jeff, can I get an update on the Affordable Housing Committee?
Yeah, I'll keep it really brief. We have completed our review of publicly owned land and identified a possible site that could potentially accommodate housing, subject to further sort of discussion about the issues, which is the piece of land that is on the corner of Beaver Meadow Road and Bragg Hill Road, where there's currently a pizza oven.
Mm-hmm.
That there's some thought that that could potentially accommodate 2 to 4 housing units. It has good soils. One would need to think about what to do with a pizza oven, which could be a point of contention. But it doesn't mean there might not be other places that are hungry for pizza in Norwich that might love to have a pizza oven nearby. But it does give us some focus to think about what that might look like, and we have yet to talk about, sort of make sure that we cross our I's and cross our T's and dot our I's to understand, like, is it really developable, et cetera. I mean, I think there's still some more work to be done, and then there needs to be some public process, et cetera. But it is at least an outcome of something that could potentially move, be actionable. We also talked about some other properties that we're gonna, more privately owned properties that we're gonna sort of have some conversations about. And we also talked at the last meeting about state wastewater issues that are getting in the way of the efficient development of septic systems that can support multiple properties. And there might potentially be some advocacy issues that we might want to advocate around related to that. So that was sort of an interesting topic. Yes.
Jeffrey, can you just clarify for that for a minute? So the state has regulations that are
Well, I'll
causing
give you,
problems,
I'll
or
give
what
you
do you mean?
an example, right? So
Okay.
in Vermont, if you want to build a septic system, you need to have 24 inches of material already in place for that effluent to go into.
Mhm.
And that they have the ability to design what they call alternative septic systems that kind of take advantage of pre-treatment, for example, allowing you
Mhm.
to do more, but you still need to have that same 24 inches, right? In New Hampshire, they allow you to bring material onto the site in order to create the 24 inches that you need. You don't have to
Okay.
have the material on place. So it
Okay.
raises the question of, like, do we really, like, is one really better than the other? And the Vermont one is quite limiting and makes it more difficult to develop in places like Norwich. So that might be potentially, we could identify one or more sort of issues that we would want to bring to the attention of our state representatives for
Mhm.
purposes of elevating that conversation. There was some discussion too about Act 250, et cetera. I mean, there's, other things. So we're just at the beginning stages of thinking through that. But you could imagine that, there could be some, at least it would be worth the time to raise those issues and see if they can get resolved, if they would help to make
Good.
affordable housing more easy to build in places like Norwich.
Thanks very much, Jeff. That was helpful. So the next thing on our agenda is discuss process and policies for the Planning Commission. We've been, we've had some discussions on this. I don't know exactly where we want to go, but I will, point out it is 8:21. I know it's been a long day on the old Zoom, so I'm fading fast. So I don't really have much to offer at this point in terms of policies, but if Ernie, you want to
I just wanted to say that in terms of the body being more deliberative, which is one of the biggest things I'm interested in, I would say that tonight has been a really good start. And I'll just leave it at that. If you want to sort of make this quick.
Great. Thank you. I agree. I think it's been a really good meeting. Jackie?
And one other quick add, I feel like not only our commission, but other town boards would really benefit from term limits. So that's something that I would see would be a good idea.
And is that something we want to discuss?
No, in the spirit of Ernie, I just want to make that comment just to say we discussed it. I mean, I know there's no conclusion, but that would be an idea that I think is worthy of discussion, at a future date. Let's put it that way. I don't want to debate it tonight, but that's I gave some thought to this agenda item, and I came up with the guiding principles that we did back in February of 2019. And there's, I think, some ideas there that we all would agree with about how to conduct ourselves, but also the term limits has been on my mind for quite a while, and I just think it should be something that this body discusses. That's all.
That's great. Thanks, Jackie.
Mhm.
Anyone else have anything else to add?
I'd like to add that I agree with the comments that were made, that I think this was a good meeting of discussion and like to see more of it and hope to. As for the topic itself, I'm mindful of the time, and I think it's an important topic that we should revisit and bring forth the discussion on the topics that we need about that, but not only just forming what we'd like to talk about, but also continue to show that we deliver what we've agreed to present. So I think this meeting was a good example.
Great. Thank you. And we can definitely just keep this on the agenda. And for tonight, we have a little less busy. Other business, anything? Jackie?
I just have one thing. I noticed that Two Rivers is having a training on zoning. Did anybody else see that? I got an email about this. I'll have to dig it out. I will send it to Melissa, to you and Rod, and if you think it's worthwhile, something that we should do. It from what I understood from the email, it's training folks who are working on zoning, which we're going to be working on. So I thought it might be good.
Cool. Thanks, Jackie.
Mhm.
Future meeting schedule, we talked about that we'll meet on March 4th. Agenda, we know that we want the process and policies back on. And whatever happens, you'll let us know if Tom is going to come, Jeff, to the next meeting. So maybe Tom.
Sounds like a continuation of maybe the framework of what the work that we're doing, the framework of this discussion. Bringing
And so Jackie will bring.
Jackie and Rod, like that collection of the data that we're putting together.
The puzzle.
Yep.
Jeff?
Yeah, two things. One is I mean, if we could get the, Tom Candon, and if Jackie's, could talk about what she put together and we could comment, that'd be great. I wonder if it might be worth also thinking about Rod's point about trying to move the zoning conversation forward, and just maybe ask him to flesh out some ideas about how that might happen. Like, what would be the next steps? That would be worth doing, I think. And the other thing is just a technical note. I did put in the chat a possible sequence of meetings if you want to get back to every 4 weeks. We are lucky, April is one of those weird months that has an extra Thursday. So you could do, if you could do March 4th, April 1, you could then get back to every 4-week schedule. But I don't know how that might conflict with other schedules people have.
I would love to get us off this 4th Thursday if possible, but
Oh, well, that's fine. That would be a different.
well, it works for everyone else. I just have like a 9-hour meeting before this every week.
I'm open. Just when you said it works for everybody else, yes, it works for me, but I'm also open to having a discussion if we need to switch that date.
Yeah, and I don't have to. It just. Oh, Rod.
Can I propose a completely different day of the week? Like, what's wrong with Tuesday?
Tuesday? Yeah,
Tuesday, the second day of the
Tuesday.
week.
yeah.
Tuesday's great for me.
I
Better than
like
Thursday.
Tuesdays better than
That's-
Thursdays. I like them much better.
I am all about Tuesday.
Yeah, yeah.
Which
Yeah.
Tuesday do you suggest?
The fifth Tuesday of the third month.
What?
We only meet once a year.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Sure. Power through. Yeah.
Yeah, really.
Well, so do you want to make that change for next week?
Yeah.
Well,
Do we need to
do
consult?
we,
maybe-
right, do we make the change or do we discuss?
Maybe we need to sort of like put it out there with other
Yeah.
people that are
Yeah.
not
Yeah.
before we change
Yes.
it at the day of the week. But
Could
I don't know.
someone
Yeah.
do that by email? Is that the kind of thing that we're allowed to do by email?
Yes, you can
I
set,
hope
yeah,
so.
you can discuss meetings, meeting times by email. You can.
Maybe
That's
either
in the open
Melissa or
meeting law.
Rod could try.
Yeah,
to facilitate
Rob
it.
will work on that.
Yeah, why don't I'll send you something like a survey that'll ask you which is your favorite day of the week for a planning commission meeting, right? Yeah.
Well,
Or even just ask them about Tuesdays,
Yeah,
yeah,
just say.
yeah,
Keep it to
yeah,
one simple
based on your
question.
schedule, you should do it based on the other meetings you have, Rod, because you have a lot of meetings.
Yeah.
Yeah,
propose a specific day, time of the month, a day of the
Yeah.
month.
Okay, great.
Any Tuesday works for me.
okay.
Yeah, great idea. All right. Wow, we're just making-
Motion, oh,
Stop.
comments from the public we got.
Roger, Linda, got anything? Hearing nothing.
No, just to say that the rustic Gantt chart was definitely the highlight of this meeting for me. So thank you.
Is that kind of like a rustic tort, like a-
Yeah, exactly like a rustic toy. Yeah,
okay,
Mm,
yeah.
excellent.
Slightly overbaked. Yeah.
I want the recipe,
Yeah, someone bring it to the next meeting.
definitely.
mm.
All right.
I move to adjourn.
Thank you.
Second.
Second,
All in favor?
Aye.
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 All right.
Thanks for coming,
All right.
guys.
Awesome.
Thank you, everyone. Good to see
Thanks a
you.
lot.
Take care.
Bye-bye.